Hey folks, it's been a while. Nate Taylor here. Just doing a quick study on tzit-tzit. I'm going to try to make this really quick and to the point. I wish I had more time to really expound on everything that I've been studying for the last 12 years, plus real extensively over the last week or two. But a lot of people have asked our family why all of us wear tzit-tzit, from the youngest to the oldest, as far as my son Arwen, who is 9, all the way up to myself, who I don't really care to admit that I'm the oldest, but that's unfortunate for me. But we all wear tzit-tzit, the men and the women, and even our kids and our family. And a lot of people have approached us about that and why we do that. Where do we find our scriptural backing for that, and what's our conviction? So I thought I would present that here because there is some that teach that there are some that teach that nobody needs to wear them. There are some that teach that only the women need to not wear them, and only the men need to wear them. And then there are some that say that men have to wear them, and it's up to the women whether or not they want to. So it's been an interesting thought process for me to try to figure out, well, how does that apply? So my goal here is not to offend anybody or even try to convince you. This is just a presentation of why our family wears tzit-tzit, and the discussions that we have had amongst each other to justify the conclusions that we found through Scripture. So first of all, we know that Scripture says to wear them. It says, "Say to the children of Israel." Now, there's a lot of discussion about what that actually means. Some folks will say children of Israel means only the men. Some will say it says men and women. And some will say, in our case, in our family's case, it applies as it is written in context. In certain areas, it does mean just the men. Only one area that I've found, it meant just the men. And that was in Leviticus chapter 18, I believe, where it deals with men and certain things that men have to go through in life in general. And so the context is very clearly for the men in that area. Then in, let's see, it goes all the way up to, okay, in Leviticus 15, it says B'nai Yisrael, and the first half of that deals with men. And then it says again at verse 30 that it deals specifically with women. And then at verse 31 in chapter 15, it brings the two together, B'nai Yisrael. So even in that context, it may be dealing just with men, but it also deals with the women halfway through. So B'nai Yisrael at the beginning is men and women, and then it concludes in verse 31 that it's men and women. So there's only one place where I found that B'nai Yisrael deals directly with the men. Now there may be other places. I have not found it. I kept digging and digging, and I felt like I was beating a dead horse, trying to find more and more. So if there's other verses that deal specifically with the men, I would be interested to see where it says B'nai Yisrael, and it's specifically for men. Now we got to be careful of translations, because in Amos chapter 2 verse 11 it talks about women, or not women, but it says the sons. It says the sons have come out. Let's pull that right out right here. Let's do that. I've got a minute. Amos chapter 2, verse 11. And I raised up some of your sons as prophets, and some of your young men as Nazirites. Not so, O you children of Yisrael, declares Yahweh. Now we have to be careful of translations, because it says just sons there. But we know that there are other translations that say, I've raised up children out of you, basically, Israel. So which one is more appropriate? So I had to do a little search on are there women prophets? And we know that there are women prophets, but in this verse it says specifically sons. So somebody may have had a little bit of an agenda. Maybe, maybe not, but we know that Miriam was a prophetess. We know that Deborah was a prophetess. We know that Huldah and Noadiah were prophetesses. So we know that there may have been a little bit of bias there. So we know that there were women prophets. So we got to be careful with translation as well. So let's read the actual context of Numbers chapter 15 here. And we know what it says. We know exactly what it says. It says, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make tzit-tzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the tzit-tzit of the corners. And it shall be to you for a tzit-tzit, and you shall see it, and shall remember all the commands of Yahweh, and shall do them, and not search after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you went whoring. So that you remember, and you shall do all the commands, all my commands, and be set apart unto your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim. To be your Elohim, I am Yahweh Elohim." So, we see just in that little bit there, that it's a reminder, that it's there to remind us, so that we do them, and search after, not search after our own hearts, and that you remember to do all my commands, says Yahweh, and be set apart. So, my question to people who will come to me and say, well, the women aren't to wear tzit-tzit, I'll be like, well, do women need to be reminded? Do they need to be set apart? Is it just specifically for the men? What about children? Are we not to guard the commands? My teacher has several teachings on guarding the commands and being a maximalist and not a minimalist. So we got to be careful that we don't start trying to rationalize about why. I'm not a woman, so I can't say it. So rationalize about why we shouldn't. Maybe we should be looking for why we should wear the tzit-tzit. Do women need to be set apart? Are there different standards for women? Of course there are, specifically to them in context. Same way with the men. If you look at the context of wherever it says sons or children of Israel, it usually will specify within the context that it deals specifically with men or specifically with women. In all other areas that I found, it's for the whole congregation. When Yahweh says all, does he mean all? If you go back up to just before the discussion about tzit-tzit, where Moshe says to the children of Israel, if you go back to verse 35, it talks about the stoning, and all the congregation is to be part of that. And all the congregation brought this person outside the camp and stoned him. That was for the guy who was picking up sticks. So, did all of a sudden, and then the tzit-tzit comes up right after that. He didn't say the women are excluded. The context of that chapter deals with all of the congregation. As far as I'm concerned, it includes children. And some people will say, well, your kids don't understand. Well, you know what? We're considered children as adults before Yahweh. We have a responsibility to pass on information to our children. It says in the Ve'ahavta, in Deuteronomy 6:5 area, that we are to impress the commandments upon our children and teach them diligently, which means to hear and do. Now, our family, we teach our children that if they are not wearing their tzit-tzits, they're naked before our king. And, my girls have come up to me, my older kids, and said, have you been forced to wear your tzit-tzits? And initially, when they were younger, yeah, that was part of their clothing. That was part of their walking before our King, and we taught them that. And, I've heard our rabbi say, sometimes Yahweh says, because I said so. Now, we do that a little bit with our kids, but my 9-year-old pretty much cannot spit out chapter, verse, and everything else. He just understands that this is part of the covering that pleases our King, and it's part of the commandments for the children of Israel. And he likes to be included in the children of Israel, as all of us do. That includes the women as well. So if we're going to be set apart as a people, this is the one article of clothing that Yahweh says we need to wear. It's not too hard for us to do it. It's not so far up that we have to go and find it, or so low that we have to hunt for it. It's right there. You get the gist of what I'm trying to say. So let's be careful that we don't get caught up in any of our traditions or any of our past whatever, to include the Jews will tell you blatantly, it is a tradition for them. The women don't wear tzit-tzit in the majority of our Jewish brothers, our brother Judah. But it's very clear that it is a tradition. In Christianity, it's taught that Jesus is our head covering, and therefore we don't have to keep the commandments. Well, I've heard that come out of people to say that, well, my husband is my head covering, therefore I don't need to wear tzit-tzit. That's a dangerous place to be as far as I'm concerned. We're all accountable. We're all going to be held accountable. Eve did not stand behind her husband when Yahweh confronted her. So we're all going to be held accountable. Miriam got in trouble just like the other folks. The women during Korach, if you think about it, right after the story of the tzit-tzit, or the commandment of the tzit-tzit, we go into the rebellion of Korach. So that's a dangerous place to be. And there's more detail in there. So I would just encourage everyone, and I've also heard men say, that in men we need to be wearing our tzit-tzit. I've heard men say that I don't wear them because I'd be afraid to offend my brother Judah. All right, so okay, I hear that. Let's be men and stand up for our Father. Let us not be ashamed. Okay? Is it more important to offend your brother Judah because you're keeping commandment, or offend our Father because you're being disobedient? The tzit-tzit is for the men to wear, and the women, and the children. And we need to convey that. I love my brother Judah. So don't get caught up with the traditions of where we came from. And let that be a hindrance to being obedient to our Father's commandments. There are so many other things here. I have to keep this within 15 minutes because of my YouTube access. I'm getting down to the nuts and bolts of this. Lastly, the thing that I wanted to say about the men hiding their tzit-tzits. What if you were married to your spouse? You're married, and you're both wearing wedding rings. You're both in the covenant together, which reminds me that everybody's in the covenant. The women have to make that covenant just as much as the men. But what if you're in that covenant and you're wearing a wedding ring, and you're in the store, and your girlfriend comes walking, your ex-girlfriend comes walking up, and you took your ring off and hid it because you didn't want to offend your ex-girlfriend, knowing full well that your wife is there watching. I don't think it'd turn out well. How much more with our Father? We need to be careful, guys. Are we being more diligent by being obedient? Do you really want to roll that dice, ladies? To, say, well, my husband was my covering. Do you really want to roll that dice? We are all responsible for our own walk. And our children need to be taught and raised to do so as well. I love you guys. I hope this makes sense to you. I have so much more. I could spend an hour just going through all the details, at least. But with that, I'm going to say shalom. And if you have anything, just hit me up with a text or an email. Nate Taylor out. Shalom.